In 1780, Paris was the most beautiful city in the world, the center of art, fashion, philosophy, and power. 1 million people lived here, the richest city in Europe, the envy of every king on earth. 20 kilometers away, their king lived in the most expensive palace ever built, while his people slowly starved. But beneath the beauty, something was breaking. And when it finally broke, it changed the entire world. In 10 years, the queen would lose her head, the king would lose his throne, and 40,000 people would lose their lives not to war, not to plague, but to each other. This is Paris in the 1700s. Reconstructed using modern AI tools from historical records, maps, and paintings. We are going to walk its streets before the revolution and watch everything fall apart after it. Welcome to Paris. Before the revolution, Paris was a city of impossible contradictions. Breathtaking beauty built directly on top of unimaginable poverty. The boulevards of the West were among the most elegant streets ever built. Wide, tree-lined, lit by oil lamps at night. 3 streets away, narrow, dark, filthy lanes, where families of 8 shared a single room and children begged at every corner. Les Halles, the great market of Paris, fed 1 million people every single day. The most complex food distribution system in the world. Bread was everything in pre-revolutionary Paris. The average Parisian spent 80% of their income on bread alone. When the harvest failed, everything else failed with it. The coffee houses of Paris were where the revolution was born, not on the streets, but at these tables. Philosophers, writers, and angry young men reading forbidden pamphlets. Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot. Their ideas spread through these coffee houses like wildfire. The idea that kings ruled not by divine right, but by the consent of the people. The Palais Royal was the beating heart of pre-revolutionary Paris. Shops, restaurants, gambling dens, and political agitators, all within one city block. By the 1780s, political agitators were speaking openly on the streets. Things that would have meant prison 10 years earlier were now being shouted in public squares. The Bastille stood at the eastern edge of the city, a medieval fortress turned royal prison where the king could imprison anyone, for any reason, with no trial required. The nobility paid no taxes, not a single franc, while the peasants below them were taxed on everything: their bread, their salt, their land, their very existence. Paris in the 1780s was a city sitting on gunpowder, magnificent, brilliant, hungry, and furious. All it needed was a spark. 20 kilometers outside Paris stood the most expensive building ever constructed in human history, the Palace of Versailles. It took 36,000 workers and 50 years to build. Louis XIV moved the entire French government here in 1682, deliberately cutting it off from the people of Paris. The Hall of Mirrors. 757 mirrors, 20,000 candles burning at once. Built for one purpose: to make anyone who entered feel small. King Louis XVI was 20 years old when he took the throne. Shy, awkward, and completely unprepared for what was coming. While his court feasted on 40-course banquets, the average Parisian was surviving on 1 loaf of bread per day. The king was not cruel, he simply had no idea. The court of Versailles spent more on food in 1 week than most French families earned in an entire year. Every morning, the king's waking was a public ceremony. Courtiers competed for the honor of handing him his shirt. Power at Versailles was measured in proximity to the king. 10,000 people lived at Versailles. Nobles, servants, guards, courtiers, an entire world completely sealed off from the reality outside its golden gates. Outside those gates, France was collapsing. The treasury was empty. The harvests had failed. The debt from America's War of Independence had bankrupted the kingdom. Louis knew France was in crisis. He tried to tax the nobility. They refused. He tried to reform the system. The parliament blocked him. He was trapped. While Paris burned with hunger and fury, Versailles burned with candlelight and indifference. The distance between them was 20 kilometers. It might as well have been 20 centuries. By 1789, the news arriving at Versailles from Paris was no longer about politics or debt. It was about survival. The city was about to explode. In 1770, a 14-year-old Austrian girl arrived at Versailles. She had been sent to marry the future king of France. Her name was Marie Antoinette. She was young, foreign, and completely alone in the most politically dangerous court in Europe. Every move she made was watched, judged, and reported. She threw herself into the life of Versailles. Balls, gambling, fashion, parties that lasted until dawn. Paris loved her at first. They called her Madame Deficit. The king gave her the Petit Trianon, her own private palace within the Versailles grounds. Away from the court, away from the ceremonies, away from the rules. She built a fake peasant village in the Versailles gardens, complete with real cows, real chickens, and real farmers. She would dress as a simple shepherdess and pretend to live a simple life. When Paris heard about the fake village while real peasants starved in real poverty, the fury was incandescent. The pamphlets called her Madame Deficit, the Austrian whore, the enemy of France. By 1789, the woman who had danced until dawn at Versailles balls was sitting in her chambers listening to the sound of an angry city 20 kilometers away. And getting closer, on October 5th, 1789, 6,000 women marched from Paris to Versailles in the pouring rain. They were not there to protest. They were there to bring the king back to Paris, by force if necessary. The queen, who had lived her entire adult life behind these golden gates, was about to discover that gates only work if the people outside them are willing to stay there. While Versailles glittered, the other Paris was dying, slowly, quietly, and with absolutely nobody in power paying attention. The harvest of 1788 was the worst in living memory. A brutal winter followed. Rivers froze. Mills stopped grinding. Bread disappeared from the markets. When bread was available, the queues began at 4 in the morning. Women stood for hours in freezing temperatures for a single loaf that cost more than a day's wages. When the bakeries closed, with nothing to sell, the anger in those queues turned into something else entirely. Something that no amount of royal decree could put back in the bottle. The average Parisian worker earned 30 sous a day. A loaf of bread cost 14 sous. There was almost nothing left for rent, fuel, clothing, or anything else. Nobody knows exactly how many children died of hunger in Paris that winter. The records were never kept. The poor did not count until they did. The pamphlets spreading through the streets had a new message now. Not just reform, not just representation. Something far more dangerous: revenge. In the taverns of Paris, the conversation had shifted from politics to something more primal. The people who had nothing were beginning to realize they outnumbered the people who had everything. 1 million hungry, angry, desperate people in the most revolutionary city in the world. The spark was coming. Everyone could feel it. Nobody knew exactly when. July 12, 1789, a young journalist named Camille Desmoulins jumped onto a table at the Palais Royal and screamed at the crowd gathered below. The king has dismissed his finance minister, the one man Paris trusted. Citizens to arms. They are planning a massacre of patriots this very night. Within minutes, the crowd was moving. Within hours, the entire city was moving. Paris had been waiting for this moment for years, and it recognized it instantly. July 14, 1789. The crowd turned toward the Bastille. Not because there were many prisoners inside, there were only 7, but because of what it represented. The Bastille was the symbol of everything they hated. Royal power, arbitrary imprisonment, the king's absolute authority over their lives. Tearing it down meant tearing all of that down. The garrison held for 4 hours. Then the drawbridge came down. The crowd poured in. The governor was dragged out and killed in the street. His head was put on a pike and paraded through Paris. That night, Paris celebrated like it had never celebrated before. The Bastille had fallen. The king had blinked. For one extraordinary night, it felt like anything was possible. At Versailles, the king was woken with the news. He asked his advisor, "Is this a revolt?" The advisor replied, "No, sire. It is a revolution." 3 weeks earlier, the king had locked the National Assembly out of their meeting hall. They broke into a nearby tennis court and swore an oath they would not leave until France had a constitution.
Vive la Révolution! À bas le roi!
Within days, the revolution spread beyond Paris. Across France, peasants burned the chateaux of their landlords. Centuries of feudal records, the documents that proved their debt and servitude, went up in flames. October 5th, 1789. 6,000 women marched to Versailles in the pouring rain. They broke through the palace gates. They killed 2 royal guards, and they dragged the royal family back to Paris. The King of France entered Paris as a prisoner, the most powerful monarch in Europe, escorted through his own capital by the people he had failed. The revolution had won its first victory, but it was only the beginning. The guillotine was not invented to be cruel. It was invented to be equal. Every man, woman, noble, and peasant the same death. Quick, clean, and democratic. Dr. Joseph Guillotin proposed it to the National Assembly in 1789. He wanted to end the barbaric executions of the old regime. He spent the rest of his life horrified by what his invention became. Executions became public entertainment. Crowds gathered hours early for the best positions. Women brought knitting. Vendors sold programs listing the days condemned. The condemned were brought through the streets in open carts called tumbrils. The journey from prison to the scaffold took over an hour through the streets of the city that had condemned them. January 21st, 1793. King Louis XVI was brought to the scaffold. He tried to speak to the crowd. The drums drowned him out. Within seconds, it was over. The King of France was dead, executed by his own people. Every monarchy in Europe went cold with fear. Nothing like this had ever happened before in the history of the world. Nine months after her husband Marie Antoinette was brought to the scaffold, she had been imprisoned for over a year, her children taken from her, subjected to a show trial that lasted 2 days. She was 37 years old. The 14-year-old girl who had arrived at Versailles full of life and laughter was gone. What they executed that October morning was something much quieter and much sadder. By the end of 1793, the revolution that had promised liberty, equality, and brotherhood had executed its king, its queen, and was just getting started. The revolution had a problem. It had destroyed the old order, but had no idea what to replace it with. And in that vacuum, the most dangerous men in Paris seized control. Maximilien Robespierre, a lawyer from provincial France, incorruptible, brilliant, and absolutely certain that he alone understood what the revolution required. That certainty made him the most dangerous man in France. The Committee of Public Safety declared that anyone suspected of being an enemy of the revolution could be arrested, tried, and executed, often within 24 hours. No evidence required. Suspicion was enough. The Revolutionary Tribunal tried up to 60 people per day. The average trial lasted less than 2 hours. The conviction rate was almost 100%. The sentence was almost always the same. The prisons of Paris filled beyond capacity. Nobles, priests, merchants, and revolutionary leaders alike, anyone who had made an enemy of the right person, found themselves inside these walls. Ordinary Parisians learned to speak carefully, to express no opinions, to denounce their neighbors before their neighbors denounced them. The revolution had eaten its own people. July 27, 1794. Robespierre's own colleagues turned on him. Terrified they would be next, they had him arrested in the middle of the National Convention. The next day, Robespierre was executed on the same scaffold he had sent thousands of others to. The Reign of Terror had consumed its own architect. 2,700 people had been executed in Paris alone in just 14 months. When it was over, Paris sat in stunned silence. The revolution had promised to build a better world. Instead, it had built a machine for killing people who disagreed about what that world should look like. When the terror finally ended, Paris counted its dead. 40,000 executed or killed across France. 200,000 imprisoned. A generation of the country's brightest minds gone. But something had changed that could never be unchanged. The idea that ordinary people had the right to hold their rulers accountable, that idea had escaped, and it would never go back in its cage. The revolution had tried to abolish Christianity entirely. Notre Dame was renamed the Temple of Reason and used for revolutionary festivals. Within a decade, the churches reopened. Some things outlast revolutions. Out of the chaos, a new kind of ruler emerged. Not a king, not a revolutionary committee, a general. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, and he would take everything the revolution had started and remake it in his own image. The Paris that Napoleon inherited was a city that had survived the unimaginable. It had torn itself apart and was putting itself back together. Different, harder, and absolutely certain it had changed the world, because it had. The Declaration of the Rights of Man. The idea that all men are created equal, that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. Paris gave those ideas to the world written in blood on its own streets. Every democracy on earth today carries a piece of what happened in Paris between 1789 and 1794. The revolution failed. The idea survived. And that is the most Parisian outcome imaginable. Standing in these streets, it is almost impossible to feel the weight of what happened here. In just 10 years, this city remade the entire world. A king lost his throne. A queen lost her head. 40,000 people lost their lives. And out of all of that, an idea was born that has never died. Liberty, equality, brotherhood. 3 words. Written in the most expensive ink in human history. If you ever walk through Paris, stop at the Place de la Concorde. Stand where the scaffold stood. Look around at the city that was built on that ground. And remember what it cost. Paris, 1789. Before the guillotine fell. Before everything changed. Just a city magnificent, hungry, and furious on the edge of remaking the world. If there is another city, another moment in history you want to see rebuilt and brought back to life, let me know in the comments below. History is waiting. And we are just getting started.